Okay, welcome back to this course on competing in Excel, and if you're not competing, you're still very good at Excel. We have covered case layout so far, and this is going to be the second video on exam technique and speed. If you haven't watched the rest of the videos in this playlist, I would suggest you do that first, but it's not mandatory. Anyway, let's get into it. So in this one, I'm going to cover three main things. The first is just some general exam technique, and then it's going to be some speed and efficiency tips, and then it's going to be some formula tips of how you can make some shortcuts in formulas. So the first tip on speed and technique is to watch the upfront YouTube video and learn as much as you can about that. I already covered that in the last video, so now let's talk a little bit about point values. So cases often differ in the weighting of points. So sometimes the bonuses here are worth a lot of points, and then sometimes you have questions like this where you have a huge weighting of 21 points per question at the end. So if you could do the last question in this case, that would give you almost as many points as everything else combined. Now that's a map question. So in terms of technique, you might think you're good at maps and want to take on that challenge first. However, it's a risky strategy. These are things you'll want to think about during the prep phase when you watch the video. In terms of what you should tackle first, if the questions are linked and kind of one builds on the other, then you don't have much choice. It's normally best to just go first question onwards. Occasionally you can solve a later question which then models everything easier and before it, so you can just start from there. Can be a risky strategy though. Another thing to bear in mind is that this differs massively whether you're competing live or online. So most of the time it's always going to be online, so you can tackle the bonus questions or the normal questions in any order you like. But live, only 2 people can normally get each bonus. So this can be a huge swing in whether you win that round or not. So when you do compete live, I tend to focus on reading the bonuses first and figuring out exactly how to do the bonuses, because that will also tell you a little bit about the questions anyway. So when you compete live, you have 10 minutes reading time, you'll read the bonuses, figure out what questions they relate to, really think about how to do those, and try to tackle them before anything else if you can, because that's going to give you the best advantage. Now let's just quickly touch on scalability of your model. So a lot of cases will have questions that build on each other, as I already mentioned. So in a case like this, it's quite obvious you're going to have to repeat something all the way throughout the case. So you have 2 options basically. You either text split this on the dash every time, accidentally put a minus there, and then times it by whatever those point values are worth. Let's say it's 1, 5, 10, okay? So that's going to give you a number, then you're going to sum it together, and as you can see, this is already getting pretty tedious, just even probably to watch. So that's you know, the score in this case. Now, I do not want to have to write this out throughout the case. I don't really want to have to copy paste it anywhere because I might be on other tabs. So this is like a prime candidate for turning something into a lambda. So I would say make a lambda, and we'll come to those in a later lesson, for anything that's going to repeat over and over again in a case. Another quick scalability tip is if you use a data table approach, which again we'll cover in a later video, you might want to look up the question details in another tab to do your workings if the workings are a bit bigger. Now, I've just set that up here quickly to look up any question number that I put in here. You don't want to look up just the question 1 because you'll have to redo this formula every time. So what you actually want to do is try to look up in whole columns. Now, although there's merged cells in the main sheet, you can still look up whole columns. And now I can put in example 3 and still pull the question details there. With the old way, if I just go back to the references there, example 3 doesn't work because I'm only looking into this for my XLOOKUP. So try and build things so it will cover all scenarios. It's just going to save you a bit of time later. Another tip is where to work. So obviously I just talked about that data table approach. A lot of the things you'll be able to do single cell in the first questions, and that's great. Later on you might need to spill some workings here, so I tend to work in this area over to the side. Even with the data table approach, I sometimes will do a data table here just to cover a single question. And other than that, I will tend to work on a whole new tab with this data table approach when it gets more complicated. So single cell is great if you're good enough to do that. Normally uses a lot of lets and so on. Helper columns great for spilling out and seeing intermediate steps. And then if it's really big workings or something complicated, I just don't even think about it and go to a new tab normally and make a model, because I don't want to risk starting here and then running out of space and having to move over to a new tab anyway. So I just tend to do it from the start. The last tip before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of like formulas and so on is how much to read. So for me, as little as possible. You need to be using your time as wisely as you can, the less you read and can still understand the question, the better. So I tend to glean as much information as I can from the intro YouTube video. That should give you enough to just start questions. So in the video, I expect they'll have told you how the scoring works, so you can just dive into here. If you don't, I would only read this, come up, look for any type of scoring thing. I see there's a scoring paragraph here, so I might read that, and then this scoring table here, so either one of those, and then that would get me going here. That would also get me to do this question, it would also get me to do this question, and so on and so on. So I wouldn't actually need to read all of the other stuff. So yeah, try to read as little as possible while still understanding the questions. Okay, now we're going to get into a bit more technical things where we're going to look at formulas and actually working. So this is a case called Ship the World. And in this one, you had to pick out details about ships and the goods. So one thing that tripped a lot of people up on this one is that the ship type and the good are not in consistent columns down here. The ship type moves along one and the good moves along two. So let's just say I was to look up some details of the ship. So I want to look up the big ship in the top here. And I would want to pull out all of this stuff, for example. Let's just lock those. Now, when I drag that down, I would be able to do some stuff with it to solve the question. Let's say I want to use my workings into the next question because it's something similar with a bit of an add-on. I can't just copy that down here because this cell is now moving across and looking into the distance column instead of the ship column. So there are two options. I can either move these formulas around, and this is another efficiency tip, that you can move boxes around in your formulas. Some people don't know that one. But a much better way is to actually just move this data first. So let's just show you. So I would move this to the end immediately because I know that I'm going to be in this column for my workings next. And then I would try to move these columns to where they line up here. So this is the ship type, this is the good. So I'd move those here, I'd move the good here. And now any formula I do will carry across. Now I'm looking into the right column because they are positioned relatively the same. So that is a very good tip that will save you a lot of time. Okay, from this part of the video, we're going to get a little bit more technical. I've provided a spreadsheet that I will work from on the screen, so you can download it in the comments and work along with me if you like. So the first thing I want to talk about here is a model layout kind of example. Now, don't worry about the specifics of the question. I just want to show you the power of how much difference model layout and setup can make. So the question is, how many years does it take to grow $1,000 to $5,000 if you had an interest rate of 10%? Well, the intuitive approach is to do a table and kind of model this out. So we'd start at 1,000, we'd then add 10%, and then our next column would start with our old balance and we'd add 10% again. We would drag those down and we want to find where we go above 5,000. So we might do an XLOOKUP to 5,000 in here. So in a real case, we had a question about genetic decay and how long would it take to decay 10% to reach a value. And this is exactly how I did it. The problem was I had to drag this so far down just in case it took a long time and I didn't know really where the stop point is. And then I watched a solution from Dim and found out that that is the slow method, and the quick method is actually just to say logarithm of one minus the other, and then we have the rate here, which is 10%, so 1.1. And that will tell me exactly that it's 16.89 years. I could then round that to the nearest year, or I have it exact. Now, the point is not to learn logarithms here. The point is that there are often huge shortcuts and tips and tricks that can save you a bunch of workings. So this was a hell of a lot of workings and I had to span it across 20 questions, whereas for this, it's a single cell solution that works for all 20 questions that would have saved me probably 10 minutes in the real case. And this is essentially the number one thing that will speed you up, is efficiency of how you approach the questions. So how do you get better at that? Well, the best way is to just watch other people's videos, compare the approach you first did to the approach they did. I would always try the questions yourself first, otherwise it won't make as much impact on you when you see someone take a huge shortcut. And when they do, that will probably stick in your brain. Okay, next up, let's look at rounding. Now, a lot of the questions in these competitions will result in non-whole numbers. And when that's the case, you will almost always be asked to round your number to 2 decimal places, 1 decimal place, or the nearest whole number. So this has tripped me up a number of times. And there's a huge warning I want to put in this video, is that some numbers that you think will result in a whole number or a decimal number actually won't, and you'll get the answer wrong. So here's, this is called a floating point error, and here's an example. So let's say we had a question, subtract 1.1 from 1.2. Well, we all know the answer is going to be 0.1, but let's do it in Excel. We put 1.2 in this box, 1.1 in this box, minus 1 off the other, and we'd enter that into our answer box, right? Problem is, we would actually get that answer wrong. I've just put in here a formula to say, does that equal 0.1? And it's false. The answer is not 0.1. The reason is, I've linked the cell here, we actually have a floating point error. Is when you show more of the decimal places here, Excel is not actually calculating exactly to 0.1. It's calculating it to 0.0999999. And that is a floating point error. There's a little explanation in this sheet. It's the way that binary approximations work in computing. So how to avoid this error? The tip is, whenever you work with decimal calculations, even if the answer is going to result in a whole number, or it's going to result in rounding of decimal points 1 or decimal points 2, still round your answer even if the question doesn't ask for it. This has tripped me up a number of times and I've lost a ton of points. So if there's ever any decimals involved, just round the answer and you will avoid that issue. Last thing to note on rounding is round at the end of the question normally, unless it tells you otherwise. If you round in interim calculations, you can get the end result wrong. That's also tripped me up. Now, before we talk about anything, let's just quickly do some navigation shortcuts. Learning shortcuts will speed you up a lot. So if I type a number here, if I press Control and Enter, it will enter it into the entire range. So I could pull some things. I could press a formula, so equals the cell above, press Enter, and the formula would work in all these cells, and it would still be relative references, as you can see. So Control Enter is one I use quite a lot. Control A will highlight up to a range if you're in a grid. Control Space highlights a column. Shift Space highlights a row. Alt equals will auto sum. So if I press Alt equals there, it will auto sum that. I can also auto sum a load of things. Alt equals will automatically sum, those 4 columns at a time. And I often use that Alt equals outside of a range and then just highlight where I want to get a sum really quickly. So that is a good shortcut. Another one is if you need to move columns around and put them in between each other. So let's just put this as a 1 quickly. So I just press Control Enter there. If you drag this, I'm going to overwrite something. But if you hold Shift and drag it, you can actually place it in between. And I can place anything in between, anything else where I want to. So that's Shift and dragging to kind of swap rows and swap columns of data. Control page up and page down will move you through tabs. Control to move to the end of ranges, so Control and arrow keys. If you also hold Shift, you will highlight them. If you just hold Shift, then each arrow key will move. Another one if you use data tables is Alt-DT. So Alt-DT will bring up a data table input. That's something that's used often, so it's good to know that shortcut. Control down will spill a formula, so if I say equals 1 plus 4. Control D will spill the formula down. Control D, so if I now said plus the number above, we're basically just going to get the 5 times table, so Control D, Control D, Control D. I could also highlight a lot and do Control D and it will bring it all down, or across and Control R, and it will pull a formula across Control R. So those are very useful. And there are many more, but let's not get too much into shortcuts. Hopefully you learned 1 or 2 new ones there. Final tip about shortcuts, anything that works navigation-wise in Excel through cells normally also works in the formula bar. So if you press Home or End, you'll go to the start or end of the formula bar. Control Shift across will highlight parts. So use the navigation in Excel in the formula bar and it will do the same thing to the words in the formula bar. That's very useful to know. The next tip I want to talk about is named ranges. So let's say we have this example data here. I've just pulled this from ChatGPT, so it might not be true to life, but we have a sports category, an item, a price, and a quantity. So if I needed to use this data, let's say we want to XLOOKUP the first item for gym equipment, I'm going to have to say XLOOKUP gym equipment. I'm going to have to move to this tab, highlight the category. I might have to lock cells as well. I want to pull out what the item is. We get adjustable dumbbells as the first item that's bought. And we might need to move back and forth through these tabs a bunch of times. Now that is really annoying. If we name a range, we can actually refer to it very quickly. So there's a couple of ways to do that. The first way is to highlight what you want to name, and that could be a single item, or it could be a whole column, or a whole row, or a whole array of data. And if we press Alt F3, you'll see we move into this little box in the corner here. Now we can name that data what we want. So we can name it cat for category. Note that you can't have names that are cell references, so you couldn't name something B5 because that's a cell reference. So be aware of mixing letters then numbers. And then we have to press Enter to lock that in. We could also do the same for item. So Alt F3, type item, press Enter. Now I can say XLOOKUP gym equipment in category, and it autofills, so it's really quick, and we want item, and we're going to get the same result. So I never need to leave this tab anymore, and I can do all of the calculations I want. A quicker way to name all your ranges is to just highlight data that you want to range, and then you can press Control Shift F3 and you'll get this pop-up box. So Control Shift F3. So we're creating names from selection. There's also a button at the top in the Formulas tab to do this, and I can choose top row. And now I automatically have, so if I just press equals item, we already have a link to that that's named with a range. So let's just go into the name manager and see. We can see them all there. This is where we can edit them, delete them, whatever we want. So the final way, and a very good way, is to convert data to a table. So I can highlight anywhere in this table and press Control T. It automatically knows my range, and I press enter. So now I have a table. So the great thing about tables is that named ranges are now automatic. So I can say equals table, open a square bracket, and then I can use the arrows to select item, close a square bracket, and I'll have that column again. You can also change the name of the table up in this table design tab to something shorter. So if we call this T and press enter, so I can say equals T, press tab to highlight it, press enter, I get my whole table out, or I can say T open bracket, item, like we did before. Another great thing about tables is that shortcuts work within the table. So if I press Control Space here, I'm only going to highlight that row. So it would be very easy if I was on another worksheet to press equals, come to this tab, click somewhere, Control Space or Shift Space to highlight row or column, and it will only go to the top and bottom of my table. Now, if that was a range like this, and I press Control Space, I highlight everything in the entire column instead of just my table range. Another useful feature of tables is if I do a formula, this number times this number to get the total price, it automatically fills it to the whole rest of the table. One downside with that is if I tried to do an array formula, like equals this times this, it won't actually work. Tables don't really like array formulas. So just bear that in mind in terms of your decision of whether you use a table or a range. If I ever need to do array formulas within a table, I will tend to do it outside the table over here like this, and then I can still get my answer with an array formula. I'm talking a lot about tables here, but here's one final tip, is locking columns. So let's say I wanted to lock a column, so I could say equals here, space shift to get the table category. I can't just put dollar signs around that or press F4 to lock things. When I move it across, it's going to move the entire table. When I get to the end, it's actually going to reset the column of the table. Now, let's say I actually wanted to lock something in the table. Well, there is syntax to do it, where you have to kind of put the category again, but you have to type the whole thing. And then you have to actually put it in double brackets, and now it is locked. So now we will have that reference locked. But that syntax is annoying, you have to type it out. So how do we lock tables? Well, one way I have found is to actually come to the settings, and you can go to formulas and turn off this use table names in formulas. Now, when I press equals this column, I get a normal cell reference, but all of the table functionality still works. So I can actually lock that now with F4, and if I drag it along, it works nicely. The only downside is I have to come to the table tab to select it, but it's quicker to select than a normal range, so that's quite good. And also, if I'm on another tab, I can actually still use equals T, open brackets, I can still pull item or whatever I want from the table. So I can use the table names in any formulas like I normally would, but also come and lock cells in it if I need to. So that's my preference when working with tables. Okay, next up, some find and replace tips. So how many blank cells are there here? Well, there's often been questions like find the blank cell in this map, and they can trip people up. So all you need to do is press highlight a range, press Control F, and you can actually look for blanks. So if I find all, I'm going to find all the blanks here within my range, and I can see at the bottom it says 7 cells found. So there are 7 blank cells in this range. I can also use that to copy formulas into the cell. So I want to copy this formula, which is just adding the number above and the number below. So I would want in this cell to say 10, in the next cell, which is blank here, to say 13. So how do I do that? I don't really want to copy this formula, manually like this into every blank cell. That's just a pain. So what you can actually do is you can copy your formula, highlight your range, Control F, find all blanks or anything else you like, hold Shift and click the bottom one, and that will highlight everything, and then come out of this box. Now, if you see here, I have all of my blanks highlighted. I can just press Control V, and my formula is neatly pasted into all of the blank cells. So that is a good way to paste formulas into odd specific spots. Next, let's say we want to find all the blue cells. Well, what you can actually do is Control F again, and you can search by format. So I could say this is the format I want, and I want to find all. And again, I have found all of the blue highlighted cells here. I can click them to select them all. I can then replace them. So if I want to replace them all with X, Shift X to get capital X, hold Control and press Enter to replace them all, just like I did with that formula example. Now, let's use that in combination to solve a common problem. Let's say we want to replace all of these grey formulas. This is a circular reference, so I'm looking at all cells around it, getting the minimum value of those and plussing 1. So if this was a path that we could walk on, many of you will have seen this circular references example before. I won't explain it now, that's for a map video later. But essentially I want to copy this formula to all grey cells only. So let's copy the formula, come to our map, Control F. The format I want this time is this grey box here. I actually do need to highlight everything again here to select it, because when I formatted that, it only selected a single cell. Find all, then I can come down to the bottom of this list, Shift click to get all of them, exit out of here and Control V to copy my formula. And now I have a neat path that's going to tell me how long it takes to get to everywhere on that path. So don't worry too much about the formula and the technique here to get steps, that's covered in a later video. All I want you to take from this is that you can find things and copy formulas to certain places quite easily with that technique. So here's a problem that doesn't come up very often, but it's useful to know how to get around it quickly. And that is when there are gaps in data. So if I press Control down, I'm not actually moving to the end of the data, which is what I would normally want to do. But let's say we wanted to sum if the quantity for all of the accessories category here. We could say sum ifs the quantity, keyboard shortcuts will work, but the category won't. So I'll just press Control Shift down. So what I like to do when this is a huge table is, instead of like scrolling down loads and trying to click at the bottom, I would just look at the number reference that we go to, and I can see it's C121. So all I would do is go B121 manually and I am fixed. That is a very quick way to kind of negate this issue of gaps in data. It does come up more often than you think actually, I've used it quite a few times. And the next tip that's kind of similar is, let's say we had a formula here, so we have the price times the quantity to get the total. I want to double click this box to fill it down. Well, it's only filling down to my gaps every time, and that's really annoying. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the quick way is to highlight the whole thing and press Control down to copy the formula. What if this was on a sheet that was huge? How would you do it? Well, you would get to the bottom of your sheet by pressing End. So let's just show you an example here on a huge data sheet. So I want to get to the bottom. So what I can do, so I can press Shift Control End to come to the bottom of my sheet, keep holding Shift and just use my arrows to drop back into here. I can then press Control D to pull a formula down that's in the top, and I'll have ignored all those gaps. I could also come to the bottom of my table if I preferred with some shortcuts. And then to get to the top, I can press Control Shift Home, and then again scan back down to where I need to be, Control D to copy a formula down. A small speed efficiency on dealing with gaps. Now with all of these things individually, they might not add up to a big time saving, but the combination of them can make quite a big difference. Final little tip on efficiency is using flash fill in a bind. So sometimes we might want to manipulate some text data or numbers or whatever it is. So let's say we want to take just the first letter out of each of this before the dashes. So FLA we want to take. So to write a formula for that, we'd have to kind of take the leftmost character, then the first letter after the first dash, then the first letter after the second dash, and that would be quite a long chunky formula. But what you can actually do is just use flash fill. So you can give Excel some examples here. So I want FLA. And now I can come here and press Control E, which is flash fill. And what it will do, it will try to find the pattern between these cells and apply it to everything else I've done here. So flash fill is good, flash fill is good. I've successfully taken out the first letter after each bracket with minimal effort and minimal time. I feel like this is kind of underused in Excel eSports. We tend to default to doing everything with a formula. You need to do it with a formula if your data is changing in a data table. This only works for kind of static data. You'll notice this is not a formula, it is manual values. But if you have a table that's a base data that you want to just split up, this is actually a very quick way to do it. Now a new kind of section of the video is going to be formula tricks. The first one kind of goes without saying, but if you don't use array formulas, try to start doing so. So let's say we want to look up the first item sold of rackets. We could say XLOOKUP rackets in table category. and we want a table item. We would then drag that down, and so on. What you can actually do in a lot of formulas is just take the whole range right at the start, and it's going to give you everything. So try to do things in arrays where you can, because it will just save you a few steps there. Next, I want to talk about how to stop using ifs and how to use Boolean logic instead. So Boolean is like trues or falses. So let's say we want to check these conditions. Is this number above 50? So let's look at the slow way to do this. We would say if, and remember we'll do things in arrays, this is above 50, give me true, otherwise give me false. That is the slow way. Now with if logic, all it's doing is it's evaluating this as a true or a false, and then giving me a certain value if true and if false. So you don't need any of this stuff. You just do not need it. So I can just say that greater than 50, and it's going to evaluate whether it's true or false. Now trues and falses in Excel are actually kind of ones and zeros, and you can convert those by doing an operation to them. So if I was to wrap this whole thing in brackets and times it by 1, for example, I've done a mathematical operation to a true or false, so it will turn those into ones and zeros. And that's really useful for things like counting. So for doing things like how many numbers are above 50, I can actually copy this formula, and what I can do, I can actually just write sum of all of those ones and zeros, and it's going to tell me that 5 numbers are above 50. Now, my preferred way is actually to write a minus minus instead of multiplying by 1. So minus minus, so minus does a mathematical operation, minus minus turns it positive because a double minus is a positive, and then I wrap that in sum. Either way works, but that is a very good tip there, and I use that all the time. Now let's work this through and or statements. So let's drop the ifs because we've just learned that. So we could say and this is greater than 50, but less than 70. Now, you'll notice that and doesn't work on arrays. So an annoying thing is we would actually have to drop that back to a single value here and then spill it down. So we now have our falses and trues. We can actually get rid of the and as well. So all we need to do is put both the numbers in brackets and times them together. And we will get our ones and zeros for trues and falses. And now we can actually go back to using arrays because we're not using and anymore. So we don't have the limitation that and doesn't work very well in arrays. We can actually go back and use the whole arrays again, and we are back to being able to use arrays and a quicker syntax. So the reason this is how this is working is because trues and falses are evaluated as ones and zeros, I'm getting a list of ones and zeros here and timesing them by a list of ones and zeros here. So if anything is not true, it will be multiplied by 0 and return a 0. If both are true, then I'll have a 1 times a 1, which is a 1, so it's true. So if both conditions are true, I can do an AND statement with a nice shortcut there. To do an OR statement, all I need to do is plus them instead of multiplying them. So we want to know if it's above 50 or less than 30. So let's put less than 30 in there, less than 30. Now let's talk about actually using ifs. So I know we just talked about dropping them, but you can use them because anything above 1 evaluates as a true and 0 is evaluated as a false. So we just want to know if a value is above 0. So instead of typing if above 0, we can just type equals if this. We don't need to say if it's above 0 because everything above 0 evaluates to a true. We can say 3, otherwise 0. So if that, give me 3, otherwise 0. So zeros will still give me zeros, but anything above 0 will come back as a 3. So this is a nice shortcut. The old way would be to say, equals if this is above 0, give me 3, otherwise give me 0. Instead of the above 0 or whatever other condition you want to do, you can just drop a lot of that formula out. And that is actually the next tip, is not writing whole formulas. So say we just wanted the left of this. Most people would type equals left this, comma 1 to get the first digit. Well, you don't actually need that comma 1 at all. If you just use left in isolation, it will work. You can normally tell if things will work because you have a number of characters in square brackets here, meaning it's optional. I don't actually need to type it. So I could say left of all of that array. I could say equals right of all of that array. And we've split the right and left letter out nicely. Another one where you don't need to type the whole formula is rounding. So let's say I wanted to round this to the whole number. I could say round this, comma. Most people would put a 0 to round to 0 digits. You don't actually need that 0. So where you have a blank in an Excel formula, Excel will normally read that as a 0. Now some niche tips for the more advanced people. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you very much. How to find if a number is within a given range. So we basically want to say if 43 is above 16 or below 49, it's between the range, it's within our bounds. So we talked about this if thing up here, so you could use that, but an actual shortcut is to say median of these three numbers. That's going to tell you what the middle number in the range is if you were to order them in order. So because 43 is in the middle, we can just say, does the median equal the number? And then we know immediately whether number's in our bounds. So 36 is not between 20 and 35. 42 is above 17, but below 44, so it's in our bounds. So to find if a number is within an upper or lower bound, that is a nice little trick. Next up, another trick that has come up before, not very often though, which numbers are missing in this sequence of 50 numbers. So we would want to scan down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, blah, blah. I can see 14 is missing, but what's a quick way to find all the numbers that are missing in this sequence? Well, let's get a sequence of 50 next to it for a second. Sequence 50. So we want to compare these two lists. And you can do this for text or numbers or whatever. So essentially anything where you want to compare two lists and find what's missing in your list, you will be able to use this trick. So if I stack those on top of each other, let's just say vstack this and this, what we're going to get is our first full sequence of 50 with everything included, and then our list where some things are missing. So if I was to say unique, obviously I'm just going to get my sequence of 50. But unique has an optional argument at the end to say exactly once. And what that does is it's going to only give me the things that appear once. And the reason that's going to give me all of my missing items, so let's just change this to sequence of 50. The reason it gives me all my missing items is because if I stack this with a sequence of 50, the missing items will now only appear once because they're not in the first list. But anything that's not unique will appear twice because I'll have a 1 in this list, a 1 in the sequence of 50 list, a 2 in this list, a 2 in the sequence of 50 list. So I can actually use that trick to compare two lists. So take two lists, vstack them, do unique with a 1 or a true. Remember, trues are seen by Excel as 1, so 1 will also work in that formula. And you'll find your missing items. So that's it for this technique, speed, and efficiency video. Bit of a long one because there's a lot to cover here. Next time we're going to talk about the 10 most important formulas. So I've touched on some of the niche formula tricks here. Next time we're going to talk about the basic formulas, how to understand them really well for like the 10 formulas you have to know that can basically solve any case. So subscribe and I will see you next time.